right. Welcome back, Stijn. Thank you again for being here. Today's topic is one that is near and dear to Stijn's heart in particularly, but I think is very relevant for just about all marketers, but also really all professionals in today's day and age. We're going to talk about AI again, shocker. But I think that this one is a really important topic and really impactful if used the right way for a lot of people's careers and just for your ability as a marketer to make your company stand out and to cut through the noise. There's no question that AI has rapidly taken over just about all aspects of marketing. It's changed the way that marketing works. It's changed the way that people conduct marketing. It also changes the competitive landscape quite a bit in terms of the amount of noise that's out there in the market and how a company can kind of get ahead. So, I mean, from my perspective, we are kind of in the middle of a technological step change. It adjusts the rules of the game, just like, when we use computers or when Word and Excel came out for the first time, or even Google and SEO for all of our marketers. Each time that one of these things came along, those who adapted prospered, and those that didn't were left behind. And so what Stijn has kind of come up with this framework, and what we'll hopefully talk about today, is that AI accelerates information entropy, and that marketers can win by making Syntropy and becoming Syntropy creators. So I really want to dive into this topic with Stijn and have him kind of share a lot of his insights around it. Stijn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, like always, Brian. It's great to talk about this topic.
Yeah, you can't get away from me. You gotta keep coming back. So let's start maybe with just explain the concept of entropy and syntropy for us, and how they relate and why they are so relevant right now.
Yeah, let's talk about those words a little bit. You introduced them already. Let's dive a little deeper. So when entropy is the default state of many systems, right? When you information, for example, and this starts with gas, of course. I think it's the second law of thermodynamics, right? You probably know better than me, Brian. But information abides to similar laws, where the more you kind of add to the system, typically the more the real level of signal in the noise actually degrades, right? Clarity kind of dissolves in sort of this amount of information growing. There's also the confusion often. Signal decays into noise, right? AI, for all its power, often when we do prompting, when we use it to do research, it doesn't necessarily always create signal. Sometimes it does, when it really helps us find something that we didn't understand before, or it organizes something for us. But it has a tendency to, especially when you keep using it, to actually accelerate entropy, right? It generates new versions of the same information, but it's not really adding any new insight or any new signal to that noise. And it kind of remixes information that already exists, right, into endless variations. And for some purposes, that's useful, it's valuable. I'm not saying that's always bad, but it does kind of often lead to your ability to, again, detect that signal in the noise to actually decrease. The word syntropy is not used very often. It's the opposite force of entropy. It's the creation of order from chaos, if you will, meaning from noise, value from void. You think of all the things it can do for us. And in a world where AI is now going to generate, some people say 70-80% of all content in the next year or so, syntropy isn't just valuable, it's kind of essential and existential, if you will, for the modern marketer and the knowledge worker of kind of the next era of work, right, of productivity work. So there is this information that keeps compounding, right, and probably faster than we as humans can actually process it. We need help. right? And the promise of AI is that it will help with that, right? But the reality is that's what most of us experience when we use it. It does a lot of work really well for us, especially in the start of, for example, prompt exchange. But then keeping it sort of under control before it turns into the clarity and turns actually back into noise is hard. It takes actual effort. And Syntropy is really about what that means, how we as human beings have some unique skills, some unique capabilities to add that syntropic effect, right? Through either the order that we can create, the signal that we can detect, the way we can intuitively make certain assessments or intuition that AI finds much harder, right? So we can kind of use AI for what it's really strong at, but also use our own superpowers to stop or slow down the drowning of valuable information, basically in the ocean of irrelevant, redundant, misleading material that also gets generated by AI.
And I mean, even to that point, right? 70% of all digital content will be made by AI. That cycle, if it goes unchecked, will just accelerate, right? And without Syntropy, without the kind of human input, the value of the content that's out there will just diminish, right? So this becomes even more and more critical as we go ahead. Talk about how does Syntropy, in your mind, differ from just the standard product marketing approach, right? They're obviously related, but I think that Syntropy kind of goes a little bit further. I guess talk about where the big distinction is there and where you try to focus to take it to that next level.
Yeah, I think we all do this already as marketers. We do a lot of the Syntropy creation very naturally. This is more about how do we emphasize that part, because some of the other things are actually better left to, for example, AI tools, right? Marketers live at this intersection between data and storytelling, if you will, right? And we are very good as humans in sort of injecting experience and creativity and judgment, meaning into systems that usually are made up of data that otherwise would turn into chaos, right? And it doesn't mean that some AI applications are not very good at creating some sort of order, right, or organizing data, but they'll do it based on the information that already exists, right? They basically order the data based on whatever information is inside that data set. Right, but what really makes humans unique is that we sometimes can find other new ways of organizing the same information, right? And maybe we add a little bit of an extra signal to it, right? And that's what makes us unique. And I think the modern marketer now, who's really good at product marketing, at content marketing, at digital marketing, they have to kind of look at how do I double down in the areas of my job that are really unique to what I can do, as I'm also using AI to constantly innovate and get myself more productive in areas where AI is just stronger, right? And this is the time to not fly low, fly high, right? To take risk as a marketer, to learn new things that maybe are a little bit scary. Let me use an example of a design. Let's talk about a couple of marketing roles, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say you're a designer. I've always thought of design as kind of this three-level and that's what I've done always, by the way. It's nothing new, not AI really related, but AI kind of makes this even more important. The basic level of a good designer is someone who can really apply the rules of design very well, right? You go to design school and you learn how colors work, shapes, how do things have to be designed in relation to each other, using neutral space, understanding rhythm, and all these things that go into designing something that people say, hey, this is done by a professional, right? And this is the designer who can only create a good visual brand, they can apply it, they can scale it, they can maintain it, they can evolve it, they can do all those things. A lot of great designers, good designers out there are that level of designers. The second level of good design, where it goes from good to really good to maybe the better designers, is the people who can also bend the rules where we needed to make the design interesting, right? The reason the Mona Lisa is beautiful or David by Michelangelo is not because those things are perfect, because they have imperfections, right? And the same if you go to a brand like the Apple logo with the bite out of the apple, right? If you go to most design that people learn to love or that people really start to appreciate, especially over time, it is not because it's following every rule, it's actually breaking the rules as well in a certain way, right? And really good designers know how to do that.
In the right way.
I can't do that. You are not great at that, I think.
I definitely can't do it.
We could follow the rule book. We could, if we're trained and we're told, what color goes where and what shape, etc. We could probably do that. But the second level design is much harder. AI is already going to struggle in that second level, right? Because that's where things, what is beauty in the eye of the beholder, all those type of things, right? But that first level is probably going to be replaced by AI, right? So designers, and I think maybe half of all the designers out there are safely making a good living in that first layer, right? Just applying the rules. That is not going to be a great sustainable way to make a living, right? If you just enjoy drawing, maybe you can, but if you want to make a living, it's a little harder to do that if you stay at that level. So you got to level up to that second level. But then the third level is even more critical because that's what AI definitely cannot do. It is not only adding that imperfection to your design and being, what often is called creative, but also being able to not toss all your design skills to the side, but to be able to actually make choices, right? A really great design is not just about the visual techniques that are used or even the imperfection that is used with using those visual techniques. It is choosing that on a one-pager that you build, if there's 7 things on there that you try to communicate, that's not going to be a great one-pager. You have to figure out what are the 1 or 2 things that I should communicate, right? And pick up Occam's razor and cut all the things that are not needed, all the things that are not doing a really important job. And that is not design as in technical skills, but it's design as making something beautiful by subtraction, right? Instead of by addition. And that's, I think, the 3 levels of design that I always look at when I manage designers, when I recruit designers. And now when AI is taking over a lot of layer number 1, the syntropic designer, what I would call the designer of the future, I call this the syntropic sculpture. That's my new word of a marketing designer of kind of the next era, is very good at layer 2 and gets relatively good at layer 3. And if you can do that, I think then your job's going to be fine. Your job's going to be safe because you can now get so much more productive because layer 1 is basically going to be automated for a large part, right? Even your research, researching different options of different shapes, etc. But you still need layer 2 yourself to make the actual choices. When I do my attempt of finding some nice pictures in Sora, for example, to do like a book cover, I end up doing like 80 or 100 different variations of something because it's just very hard for me to really get quickly to what I really think will be beautiful, right? And a really great designer will do that in probably 8 iterations instead of 8-0, right? So that's a designer. We can talk later about maybe the writer as an example, but maybe Brian, any thoughts on this first example?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely resonates, and it is. What's interesting is that it's in some ways very new, right? With all of the things that would make a tactical designer relevant and valuable, like no longer apply, and those sands are shifting. But also at the same time, the things that at the core a good designer would use, or a great designer would use, still absolutely remains the same, right? Like that differentiator hasn't changed. And that, I mean, it can probably be explained.
It already was the
exactly.
The
it's always been that way, right?
Yeah.
And that absolutely remains, right? This can probably be explained better than I'll try to explain it. But, the designer's job is to, at the end of the day, like really communicate the brand in a beautiful and compelling way, right? That also, helps with conversions and all those things. And those are all still the same, right? If that deep knowledge of the brand and the prospect that you're trying to communicate absolutely remains and is amplified by AI, I would say, right? But if you don't have that knowledge, or you remain in that tactical world, then what used to set you apart, even if it was speed or quality or anything like that, or adherence to the brand standard, right? Those quickly just become table stakes, right? At best. And so it absolutely changes the game. But to your point, right? If you can push yourself into the strategic role or really know your customer deeper than anybody else, right? And know what the value that you bring deeper than anybody else, then that sets you apart. That's what
absolutely.
I like to look at.
Yeah, and the other thing you mentioned, if you're a really good product marketer, if you're a really good marketer, you have a great starting point, and you have, because when you think of, for example, the first book I wrote, T2D3, it goes very deep into having the foundation for good go-to-market execution being your ICP and your personas, right? What's it for? Who's it for? The value prop pillars. What are your differentiators? What do you do better than others, right? What are you best at? What can only you do? What guarantee can you provide? What promise can you make? Those things are even more important now, right? If you do those really well, it will help you create a project in ChatGPT and load up the files, your ICP files, your persona files. If those personas are really good, they have job to be done details, etc. That will allow you to create better content, right? Because it's not about the spelling and the grammar anymore. But if you do all this really foundational work really good, and you have good brand voice inputs, for example, to your AI, your LLM, that will allow you to write 5 or 10 email sequences that are going to be actually pretty good. Because the spelling and the grammar and the rhythm and the timing, all those things AI actually does better, because there's a lot of data to go off, right? And there you do want to do it based on existing data, existing knowledge. But your input, this is what I call the signal, right? The signal is, do you have a good ICP, good personas, a great set of value propositions? Are you able to articulate those versus the competition, versus what companies get somewhere else or customers in your brand voice? If you have all those things, and then there's ways to write those up that LLMs will understand them better, which is also, I think, a very good practice to learn. But that will make you a really phenomenal marketer, utilizing AI the right way without it becoming more noise, but actually optimizing for signal. And that's what I would call this kind of syntropic effect.
But this is where the signal acquisition becomes so almost more critical, right, than it used to be, right? I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, but in the old days, a good marketer could kind of produce really good content with less of a foundation of signal, just through intuition, right, and knowledge around the segment and the customer and everything like that. And now, since you basically have this super knowledgeable intern, right, that doesn't have the context of your industry, your product, what you give it, basically you give what you get in terms of quality, in terms of value, right? And so it almost becomes your job to dig 10 layers deeper than you used to now, to make sure that that the outputs match the quality that you need. If not, you'll just end up spending 10 times more, right, effort and time to get the same result.
Yeah, this actually just happened. I had a client where we had a small team, people that were relatively unfamiliar with the business, but they're really good at using AI. Good writers, good designers, good marketers. And we just made a small mistake in the kind of the product sequence of the execution sequence, and we had people who had started to build web pages and some design work before we actually had really finished our what's it for and who's it for signal documents. Right? We had created an ICP, we had some personas, we had some job to be done. And to your point, we had spent extra time in the workshop with the clients to do a lot of extra sort of signal building, if you will. Signal, what did you just say? Signal extraction, right? By the way, tip, when you do a workshop like that, record it and use the human transcription as an important part of your signal. There's nothing more valuable. Corners. Yeah, when you have people in the room with you, like your prospect who maybe knows their clients better than anybody else, and they're talking about the pain points and the jobs to be done, etc. Every nuance, every word, the intonation even, right, matters, right? It will help you create optimal signal to understand what's really important for these customers, for example. So anyway, we did a workshop, you get all those transcripts, and now you create some really good signal documents out of there. What's it for, right? In this case, it was a company that did laboratory science. And so we had actually 2 what's it for documents. One was what's it for the science, and one was what's it for the service, right? To really separate those really 2 parts of their business. And then we had a who's it for document that had ICP, personas, jobs to be done. And those documents were drafted, and they were actually pretty good. But we always add one more thing, which is we want to talk to the actual customers of our customers. We want to interview the actual people who buy those products or services. And we had not finished those transcriptions yet, and then the sort of human transcriptions out of those interviews. So these what's it for and who's it for documents were not completely ready. The team had started to build content. They started to build some web. There was a timeline for the project. People wanted to get ahead, so they started to build the homepage and some landing pages, etc. And so 2 weeks later, we actually finished the edition of the human interviews that we did with our customers, and that just made the signals a little bit stronger. It confirmed that some things that we had in our value proposition were really validated by those customer interviews. Some of the ICP and job to be done data was far more specific. Of course, now we even had quotes from those customers, right? So we had all this extra signal, and we redid basically some of the content building. We looked at, hey, if we would use this, would it change our homepage? And it actually did. And that's actually perfect. That's perfect for an LLM, right? You just toss all these interviews in, you basically get good summaries, good sort of what is the delta between what these customers said versus what we heard in our workshop. And it was just a wasted effort then, because now we had to redo the homepage, redo some of that other content. So you have to extract this signal, and then before the inevitable dilution starts, when you start using it, when you start creating content, you use the word intern, but a lot of marketers are just not very different when they're working for the first time with another company. They're like an intern. They're still learning what this company does, right? So when they create content, inevitably, dilution of signal will happen, right? And then you add AI to that, it'll accelerate it, right? So what we then ended up doing is injecting some fresh signal, right? With this new set of interviews from these customers. And it helped us absolutely keep the signal clean, and it helped us create good content. But it definitely was not optimal, the sequence in which we did. So make sure that in this new world where you use all these tools that really accelerate things, that you do it in the right order.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're bringing up as well is again, both new and very important, but also just one of the core principles of product marketing, right? I remember when I can't remember which client it was, but I was much less experienced than I am now, and was working for a client and couldn't get some of my campaigns to hit the way that I wanted them to, right? And I went to you looking for advice, and I was expecting you to dig into tactics on, spend amounts and when ads were running and all these things. And the only thing that you went for was, okay, show me the messaging and positioning, show me the ICP and personas, right? And then I did. And then you said the very next thing that you went to was, how many customer interviews have you done? Yeah, exactly. And so all those things, right, at the end of the day are so very much the same, right, in terms of now as they were back then. But again, it's almost as if the cycle just has been sped up so much, right?
And it is so much easier to get, of course, faster, right? Mm-hmm. If you now have a team that gets, with all this AI capability, so much better at producing content and doing a lot more volume and a lot more speed, then if you don't have your signals straight, the amount of things that you'll produce that are not going to be very good is just going to overwhelm you, and it also becomes then harder to clean it up, right? So yeah, I'm kind of thinking of it less like a sailboat going off course, right? If you're constantly, and the Syntropy is almost like constantly keeping the little bit of steering, right? That you keep this thing from not going too far off course, and these small corrections are still the same as they always were. They just will happen to have much faster and earlier, because the veering of it's like the wind has started to pick up, right? So the sails are catching so much more power with all these LLM tools, that your ability to keep the ship on course, you have to almost have a more forceful counter to this enormous strength that LLMs have to create new information and new artifacts out of your signal. That your counter, that's what Syntropy is. It's constantly making an effort as a human to keep things on track, to add clarity, to add signal, to validate if the LLM is doing actually the things you want it to do. Just like you checked in with your intern before, but now you just have to do it a little faster.
Well, now you have a million interns, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of this boils down to, is it almost puts more pressure on particularly the CMO and the product marketer, but every person who uses the AI in their marketing needs to be constantly adding signal to it to make sure that it goes the right way, particularly if you are managing a team of people who are doing it, right? It gives you almost more control, but so much more responsibility to keep that really tight.
Yeah. So let's talk about this other role, because the most common roles in design, in marketing that people think about usually are the oldest roles, if you will. Is someone who designs something and someone who writes something, right? And then now, of course, we have other roles, like more on the technical side. But talked about the designer. Let's talk about the writer, the content marketer of the future, right? I call this the syntropic scribe. This is really, for me, the most interesting of all the marketing world, the most powerful change agent. If they really embrace this and if they build up their sort of toolkit to do the things that are going to be more and more valuable. It's also, I think, a group of people who feels most threatened by AI. Because we all know kind of the stories probably of someone who was a good content copywriter who basically gets, there's the story, I think I have it in the Syntropy book, Olivia Lipkin, her manager, or group of managers, I started to refer to her as Olivia ChatGPT in Slack messages. She was a 25-year-old copywriter, really good writer, very talented writer, right? And at a startup in San Francisco, good at her job, valued by clients. But when ChatGPT came up in meetings, she felt insecure and anxious, right? Because the things that people were doing using that were sometimes absolutely the same quality or sometimes better, but than the work she was working. And I think a couple months later, she was fired. And that's not a unique story. That's happening a lot, right? And the thing is, Olivia probably had all the tools to add new types of value that were not going to be replaced. So let's talk about what those are. So when you think of a great content writer of the past as well, but now increasingly of the future, it's more of an investigative journalist, right? It's someone who can actually ask very important questions, who's a great interviewer. We also in T2D3, we talk about this technique called the why and the how ladder. It's where you get sort of the skill as an interviewer to get behind the reasons why people think something is important, right? You ask a why, you ask why questions a couple times, you step up the why ladder. And then after you've done that and you've gotten to kind of the core, it's like, hey, we want the world to be a better place. You kind of, okay, now I understand sort of enough of what the driving force is behind why someone cares about something. Now you step down the how ladder and you ask, okay, how is it that you do this? What makes you special? It gives you phenomenal positioning and value prop content. So a great marketer who's on the content side is good at that. Is good at interviewing, good at getting those kind of really nuggets out of an interview that you cannot get from the surface. And they're great storytellers, right? And these four things, right? Great interviews, investigative journalism, why, how ladder usage, story, those are not done by ChatGPT anytime soon, right? Because the ability that we have as humans to connect certain things to context, to connect the digital world to the real world, to have real good sort of thoughts about ethics, right, and morality, and collaboration between people and AI, right, and the communication that goes into turning certain ideas into something that gets effectively understood. Those are human skills, right? And there's a long list of other things that I can add to that. Cultural translation, right, is another one. Coherence across certain types of topic. Intuition that makes you feel, hey, this doesn't sound right? Can't really tell why, but it doesn't sound right. So those are the things that for me are what I would define the skills and the experience that great content marketers will benefit from and will make them not be obsolete anytime soon. If anything, they'll use AI to make their writing more productive, right? To be able to check themselves on things like style and grammar, but not necessarily the actual ideas and the storytelling that goes behind a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on top of that, even just more effective, right? You can produce more at scale across even more personalized across both the funnel and to who you're talking to, right? And even the asset type, you can run tests. Like it allows you to fine tune your message so much more than you ever would have been able to. Again, as long as you have the right viewpoint and the right kind of inputs to help guide it along the way.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you have two more that we haven't touched on yet, right? We have the sculptor and the engineer. Do you want to touch on those really quickly?
Yeah, we talked about the sculptor. This was first, and then the sort of the new design. The scribe was we just talked
the Navigator,
about.
I guess, the engineer.
Yeah, the Syntropy engineer and the Syntropy Navigator. So the engineer for me is the kind of the new RevOps specialist, digital marketer, right? All these, whenever it's, which ads you buy in Google search, or how do you optimize a campaign in HubSpot? Those are things that probably AI will do better already today, or will very soon. So that's not going to differentiate you anymore, right? What will help, things like how do you actually connect all these systems, right? The different AI capabilities with the different human inputs. Like I talked about how we use, for example, ICP, a persona input signal to then do content marketing at scale, right? The way the AI tools actually read these signals that's technology, right? And building the agents, and the MCP stands for Model Configuration Protocol. I think it's the new language, sort of like an API used to be, the new language in which kind of AI systems talk with humans and talk with each other. So the Syntropy engineer is really good at kind of connecting these things, right? And whether it's scripting something so that you get these high signal inputs that we create as marketers to be effectively used by AI in a repetitive pattern, for example, or in a iterative way where there's constantly something maybe that gets improved, A/B testing, doing multivariable experiments like optimizing reach and resonance, right? Designing growth loops, right? Where you compound kind of syntropy over time because you know that there will be entropy that gets created, right? LLM, for example, creates a whole bunch of variations of something. Now you have to add that kind of to a loop where you test those things and then turn it back into syntropy, into signal, right? And even the dashboards, right? How do you communicate information? All those things are going to be really, really critical. And the Syntropy engineer who kind of turns AI human collaboration and feedback loops and incorporating privacy, by the way, not an important, and security, into this kind of Syntropy engine, I think it's going to be extremely valuable. This is kind of the new system architect for marketing, right? Not necessarily the campaign manager. And they understand that kind of each step when you use the signal and human inputs to accelerate it with AI, risks entropy, right? And the introduction of entropy. So they're the masters at using technology and configuring this correctly to limit that, to keep that under control. They can code, but they also understand how code helps with this sort of syntropic syntropy creation. Then the last role, the Syntropy Navigator, that's my new role for maybe new name for the CMO, right? The leader of kind of your go-to-market function. It's about, this is where you actually make sure that there are great personas, great ICP, great value proposition. It's really not much different than doing that in the traditional marketing leadership role. We used to call this always the big M in marketing, right? You have the small M, which is all the execution. Big M, that's what's kind of who's it for, what's it for, the value prop framework, the strategy of your go-to-market team. That's still the same. But I think the Syntropy Navigator is that new CMO of the future who understands how to do this in an AI-enabled, AI-first, maybe for certain scenarios, world, and who also knows how to manage to find, recruit, attract, retain, develop kind of the scribes, the sculptors, and the syntropic engineers.
I mean, what's interesting about going back to the engineer for a second is that the almost boiling it down to the role and the role's purpose hasn't really changed, right? It's just to scale marketing, right? In a way that, in the old days, it was adding email automations to a CRM and using lead scoring, right? And workflows. And now it's changed to linking LLMs to apps and extracting and analyze information at a completely different scale, obviously, than what was done before. And really like unlocking the true potential of marketing outside of even the CRM, right?
What I think really changed, Brian, is that the Sculptor, for example, now incorporates people who used to maybe work in PR and in communications and PR, and people who were working in SEO, where they did content marketing for SEO purposes, people who were campaign managers and were in that campaign basically developing the content assets, people who were email marketing managers and were writing emails. All those fall under that same Sculptor now, because the tools make it possible for this individual to do all those things, right? But what will happen, I think, within that group, sort of, let's call that term, like Sculptor, a new group of skills, right? Investigative journalism, really great interviewing, storytelling. I can see there again being specialties, right? People that are just great storytellers, the best storyteller in your company, right?
Yep.
People who are the best interviewers, people who are the best investigators, right? And so you could have 3 new roles. But it's no longer PR, SEO specialist, SEM specialist, right? Now it's the journalist, the interviewer, the storyteller, right? So you got these new 4 kind of like master categories in my view, and then within those, as your team grows, you could have specialties again. But I do believe that this is a significant change, and that's why I gave them new names. Although there is, of course, a mapping that I did to the designer, the writer, the RevOps specialist, and the CMO.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I guess, let me see if I have any other questions. Oh, there we go. I guess, is there any other advice that you'd give to somebody on an individual level so they've heard our podcast, they agree with all of our points as they should, and they've decided that, they need to start pushing on Syntropy more, right? Is there any other advice that you would give to them to do that in their role so that they can be more effective and can make more use out of AI, be more efficient, basically catch the wave that's coming by us right now?
Yeah, it's a long list, Brian. Wrote a whole book about it. Let's talk about some other things. So if you want to be the chief Syntropy officer of your company, right? Let's call that the new CMO. There's 2 other things, a lot of other things, but 2 other things that maybe are worth quickly talking about in the couple minutes that we have left here. One is there's a book that I have recommended to a lot of people called Who, Not How. It talks about, when you're asked to do a job or a task, it's not seldomly that you're not the best person to do the work. You might have a certain level of skill, certain level of experience, but there might be someone else who actually would do a much better job, would actually enjoy doing it more, and we're just better positioned to do the work. We are very conditioned as human beings, as when we would say no to a task or a project, given that that's being seen as negative, right? Or I'm lazy. I don't want to do the work, right? And I think that's no longer acceptable. I think if I'm your customer and I ask you to do a certain amount of work for me, a certain project, I want you to think about who is best suited to do this, because on the list of alternative people to do the work now is AI, right? And so if you're the person owning the outcome, owning the accountability, I want you to use AI. I don't like to work anymore with people who don't use AI tools because they think that I would find that below my standard, right? If a writer, for example, is not using AI, I probably will start thinking that I'm paying too much money, that they're spending too much time doing things manual that they now could do so much faster, right? So who, not how, this question of, am I the best to do this work? Or is there either someone else that I could either ask to do this or delegate it to, or now in this case, an LLM or another AI tool that's just better equipped to do the specific thing that needs doing, then I would not feel perfectly serviced, right, by a marketing professional. So you need to become very good, I think, as a marketer, to be comfortable to either delegate, outsource, or manipulate, use, instruct, whatever tool, whatever best way to actually perform the job is, even if you have the end accountability to get it done. So who, not how, is more important than ever before.
You can almost...
Then the second... Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, just real quick. You can almost think about, this is a point that I think you brought up in a previous podcast, but, as a marketer now, or as a marketer with AI at your fingertips, you're almost the lead of a team now, right? And you can almost think about what you're saying in the who, not how, as basically you, as your marketer, need to build your team, right? You need to make sure that the domain that you have mastery over, that you need to have mastery over, right, is complete, whether it's your manual skills or it's the team that you build through AI to facilitate that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you now have a huge extra responsibility as you're managing that team of all kinds of tools, that you make sure those tools are effective and well managed and productive, and that you actually use them, right? If you would have a team of people and you wouldn't use them for things they would be better equipped at than you, that would not be great use of company resources, right? Or of your own resource. So who knows how? Then when you build that team, the second thing that I was going to add is, we call this at Kalungi, we call this the STOP methodology, S-T-O-P. And it's really the instrumentation, the implementation of this team that we talked about. And the letters stand for, well, first stop, think for a second, right? Who, not how. Okay, this is what I need to do. Maybe I'm not best equipped to do this. Let me actually see if there's someone else or a tool or something else that can do this work for me. How is now the next step? How are we going to do this? If this is a one-time effort, so we stop and we say, S, should this be standardized? T, if we standardize, should we actually turn it into a template? Standardization gets you some productivity gain, because if you need to do this thing more than once, now you can do it again and again and again and don't have to actually think about it anymore, right? So you standardize it. If there are other people who could also benefit from this work, then you should templatize it, right? So you go from standardization to templatization. If this actually is a template that gets used by others, now you can learn, you can build in a feedback loop, and you can optimize that template. So standardize, templatize, optimize. And guess what? Before you know it, you have optimized this so far that it has value in its own, enough value for you to be able to, Brian?
Productize
it. So that's a Kalungi sort of approach. Standardize if you think you'll do this more than once. If it's very expensive to standardize, maybe if you do it more than 10 times, right? So that's kind of a trade-off you're having to make. Templatize it if others could also benefit from this. If others use it, your template, optimize it based on the feedback loop that you now can build in. And once you are optimizing it, now you might be onto something you could turn into a product. Productize it, the P, right? Which then allows you to actually add a new thing to your value prop, right? Something you can actually sell and get paid for. So who, not how, should I be doing this or something else, someone else, etc. If I need to do it, let me stop and say, will I do this more than once? Standardize it. Will others also benefit from it? Templatize it. Can I learn from those others using it, optimize it, and can I turn it into a business, productize it?
That's perfect. And I've talked with many people who have said, I can't, I'm too busy to do that. I'm too busy to use this stop methodology, right? I'm going to do it manually and get it out of the way and then move on. But to your point, if there is something where you're doing it multiple times, you are almost too busy. You become very quickly too busy not to do it, right? Like every task that you take on now basically you have to ask that question of, hey, if I'm going to do this more than once, how can I make this much more efficient for myself? Or else you'll just end up drowning, right, in work.
Yeah, and now everybody has access to, whether it's ChatGPT or another LLM you use, you can ask the ChatGPT, hey, how do you think I can actually standardize?
How should I do this? Yeah,
and you'll get some good ideas. And the reality is that it's not different from 10 or 15 or 100 years ago when you had other people in your team maybe that you could ask to standardize something, right? There's always ways to scale. But now with all these enormously powerful tools that are very good at a repetitive task or things that you can standardize, you're doing yourself a huge disservice if you don't use this kind of this approach all the time for almost everything you do, unless it's something you just enjoy doing. If you want to read a novel or a poem, by all means, don't standardize that.
Yeah, but you got to jump in 2 feet first, I think, for this one. And if you can, I think you will absolutely reap the rewards. But if not, it's a hard and long road upwards.
Also, don't be scared when you templatize, for example, that others will benefit from your work. That's the best way for you to create value that actually will be, that you can sustain. If you can't productize it and make money off the instant value you created, it will be part of your reputation, right? And that's the thing that will bring you value over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Do you want to give, I don't know that we gave a plug for your book. Do you want to give
no, let's do it.
Official plug for it?
Yeah, I think this podcast will probably go live around the time that this book will be live in Amazon. Syntropy, showing you the proof and the author copy. So it will not have this band that this is just a temporary cover. The cover will hopefully be a little bit sharper, a little nicer. But Syntropy, how we as humans can create clarity and meaning in a world of AI-enabled humans, where entropy will have a huge effect and will sometimes create more problems than solve them. And we as humans have a unique ability to control that. Syntropy is all about what marketers can do in that world, and I hope it will be useful for some people and some marketing agencies.
Highly recommend. Go check it out on Amazon. And thanks so much for the conversation, Stijn.
Thank you, Ryan.